Hi, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about collaborative learning in online and hybrid courses. To give you a little bit of an overview of our topics that we're going to talk about today, we want to give some overarching principles of doing collaborative learning in the online environment. We want to give you some examples of some specific activities that you can do synchronously and asynchronously in online and hybrid classes. We want to give you some ideas for sources for some of these collaborative assignments that already exist. And then we want to talk a little bit about technology and collaboration. First, let's briefly mention why is collaboration important. We could do a whole workshop on why collaboration is important, the research that shows that collaboration helps support student learning, achievement, retention, and persistence. But also, teamwork is an employability skill, and ideally, students who come away from our educational institutions will be able to work on project teams independently and effectively. Then another aspect that comes up as we start to read about collaborative learning, students reported better mental health outcomes during the pandemic when they were more connected to other people in their online classes. So there's some mental health outcomes that come from these collaborative learning environments as well. So we just wanted to center this workshop around the idea that collaboration in our online and hybrid learning environments is very important. And then we can move on and focus on how to implement that. So we want to give kind of some overall principles about collaboration in online and hybrid courses and how you can start to think about building aspects of collaborative learning into your courses. One of the main points of facilitating collaborative learning with students is to teach them important skills. Collaboration itself is a skill. And keep in mind, as you design collaborative activities into your course, we want students to finish with these skills in teamwork and collaboration, but they may not enter your course with those skills fully developed. You may have to make explicit the tasks of working in a group, especially in the online environment. So if we have a classroom full of students, we break them up into groups. They're all working on the same kind of group project. They can overhear other groups and what their discussion is unfolding and shaping into, and use that to try to help shape the discussion within their own group. When we do this in the synchronous online environment, students are in breakout rooms. And when we do this asynchronously, groups are even more removed from one another. So they don't benefit from overhearing how another group is working to pick up skills that they might not already have. One note is that we deliberately use the terminology collaboration and teamwork to reflect these employability skills. Students have often had a lot of group work in high school and may groan when they're being told that they'll work in groups in college level courses. But they do understand that in the workplace they will need the skills of effectively working on project teams. And so by changing the language around how we talk about collaborative learning in our classes, that helps with student buy-in when they understand why they're being asked to do some of the tasks and performances that they are. So if we're going to work together, where do we start? We have to be able to talk to one another in some kind of way to do any kind of collaboration. So I want you to think about what the communication tools are that you use in your online class. I want you to think about how you communicate back and forth with individual students, but also how do your students communicate with one another? If you've relied solely on email, then you may have really good two-way communication back and forth with individual students, but they might not have the same mechanism to be able to reach each other in the course. So what communication avenues could you facilitate with students? Do you just want to rely on email? which is a perfectly good strategy if it's working for you and your students? Or do you may want to open up communication to take into account other new types of technologies that you can incorporate in your course? For example, in the past spring semester, I started using Slack as a class communication tool. And my students really adapted to using it very well. And it was very helpful to help students connect directly with one another in chat conversation form without having to go out of their way to reach out to each other, or without having to disclose, like giving out your cell phone number or other personal contact information that they might not be comfortable with. Now, this workshop is part of a series that we're doing to help faculty that are converting their courses to the Blackboard Ultra course shell design. And this presents a great opportunity for faculty. When you're redesigning your online course, you can really have the opportunity for intentional design. So you can design collaboration into your class from the start. You can write collaboration into your syllabus in various ways. You can use the groups tool that's in Blackboard Ultra course shells so your students can directly see the names of students that they have been assigned this collaborative project with. The groups tool makes it really easy to set up different kinds of groups. And so you can plan on changing the groups at various points throughout the semester. The research shows that heterogeneous groups lead to better individual and group outcomes, and that self-selected groups can tend to have a negative impact on minority and low ability students. So by using the heterogeneous groups and helping students to really expand the number of students that they're collaborating with on their project teams, we can help them to attain better educational achievement on the projects that we're having them do in our classes. And then again, if you're designing collaboration into your syllabus, you can scaffold the collaborative work. Students often don't know the expectations of working in groups, and so you can start small and build in the steps that are necessary to get students to independent project teamwork. It's important to act as if you expect students to collaborate with one another. In-person discussions benefit from a bit of silence to allow students to think and begin to contribute. And so as facilitators and teachers, we often had to become very comfortable with that moment of silence in our classrooms to allow students the chance to think and process and come up with contributions that they then wanted to raise their hand in order to say. In online classes, especially synchronous online sessions, the dynamics of thinking and then unmuting and entering into conversation take even more time than they did in person. So if you pose a question, you'll need to wait and wait and wait some more. It can feel very strange to have silence in an online class. But if you jump in to ease your own discomfort, students learn that they just have to wait you out, that you'll pose a question, that you'll sit there and let it get quiet for a few minutes, and then you'll answer your own question or you'll just move on. But if you really wait and expect that students are going to meet you in that conversation and participate with you, then they learn that they have to participate for the class to move forward. To get past that awkwardness, it's easier for them to just kind of say what they're thinking than it is to just wait you out. But the other thing about expectations is you can set the tone in your class, either an online or a hybrid class, that you're going to expect students to have conversations with one another, to work in conversation with one another, to work on these project teams. You can set those expectations, as we said, in your syllabus by assigning points to them. But one of the most common things that we say, I know at my college, is students don't do optional. And I want to address that just a second because that's a phrase that Kay McClenny at CESI coined. And she actually did not mean students only do what you give them points for. Okay? What she meant is students do what you set an expectation for them to do. And sometimes that means attaching points to something, and that's how you make it not optional. But also, you can make things not optional in a number of different ways other than just assigning points to it. You can make it required to progress on in your class. You have to complete this in order for the adaptive release to open something else up. You have to do this in order to be able to go to the next step in the class. There's a lot of different ways that we can set expectations for students other than just putting points on something and having it to be required in our syllabus. Part of the scaffolding process of teaching students how to work collaboratively is that you may have to teach them the different roles that group members take on when they work on project teams. And so for larger projects or more long-term interaction, you may have to formally either assign students roles or have them self-select the roles that they take on that will help their groups to function. Listed on the slide here are just some examples from one type of collaborative learning structure. But you can teach students that in a group, someone is going to need to kind of facilitate the conversation and keep the group on track. Someone's going to need to kind of take minutes or otherwise record the group's ideas, commitments that people make. When you say, I'm going to work on this part, I'll do this by the next time we meet. Someone's going to need to kind of record those, maybe follow up in emails. That's the way project teams work in the workplace, and that's how our students can collaborate in our courses as well. In this particular model, they also include a reflector or somebody in charge of quality control, and their job is to kind of reflect on how the group is working, pull in people who might not be as active, and report some of that information back to the instructor. So if there is grading or points or other expectations based on the group functioning, they're the person who reflects on how well is this group working and what additional steps need to be taken by different people in the group to support the collaborative learning that's going on. Roles should rotate frequently so that students all have a chance to take on these different roles. And then many instructors, especially if you have a large amount of collaborative work that's happening in your class, or if students are very new to the type of collaborative work that you're having them do, you can have students work on a charter or a group contract, a memorandum of understanding, some kind of document where either you lay out for them your expectations or you lay out a series of questions that they can discuss as a group and come up with their own group norms or their own group expectations. Miriam Posner at this link has a project that she has students work on where they group design a website. And so these are the guidelines that she gives to students, which is a list of questions for them to answer about how their group is going to work and perform. She has the list of roles that are kind of expected in the group, so decide who's going to take on what role. Kind of decide if this is a long-term project, a website that you want to keep up with, or if you're just designing it for the purposes of this project and it'll phase out after the class is over. She has a number of different things for the group to think about as they're deciding what their behavior and what their norms are going to be like in building this website together for this course grade. You can also, if you do any kind of Googling of group work charters, group work contracts, collaborative learning, you can find lots of examples online. This particular one, again, is a set of questions that students can ponder, kind of what are our objectives, who's doing what are the expectations, and what are we expected to produce. Okay? So if you're doing a lot of this type of teamwork in your courses, you can actually have students come up with a project charter or a group contract before they start so that everyone knows the roles and what's expected of them. And then students are always concerned about what if I'm in a group with people and they don't do anything. So some collaborative work goes more smoothly if students are required to complete some work individually before the group comes together for their tasks. And so you can set a certain amount of the grade that will be on this pre-work. It can help students feel better if the majority of their grade comes from their individual work. But also it helps the collaborative work to begin because everyone can share what they've already done and they can begin to provide feedback and evaluate each other's work. So one semester I had students work on a concept map or a mind map I gave them a set of terms and concepts that we had been studying in that chapter, and I wanted them to just kind of map out how all those terms were related to each other. And I found a real wide variety in the quality of the work that I got back from students. Some students had done a lot of that in high school. They knew exactly what I was looking for. Some students were extremely creative with it and color-coded. And other students were still thinking very linearly and kind of almost listed the terms rather than map out relationships between the terms. So the next semester I had the idea, what if they could all see each other's work? Or at least see a few others' work. Maybe looking at the whole class could be overwhelming. It was a little overwhelming for me to have to look at that to grade. But what if I could have them all do the mind map, have them get into groups of 2 or 3 students and look at each other's, and then decide how they wanted to edit theirs into a final product, taking into account the things that they'd seen and the feedback from other students on their work. By having the bulk of the score come from their pre-work and their final product, then students were very comfortable with this project in how they were being graded and that their own effort was going to count quite a bit toward the grade that they got on this project. But then I also had some points that were related to the feedback that they gave to other students, so that they knew giving feedback to other students was also a required component and that they needed to be able to provide some of that feedback so that I would know that they were looking at others' work, providing some feedback on it, and then I could see how much that changed their final product. It was a good exercise for the students as well, because when we went into the project, especially that first semester, students really had kind of the attitude that this was just going to be, all right, I'll just turn in the same thing at the end that I turned in the beginning. But they could really see how seeing others and getting feedback from others really could shape and make better their final product that they turned in. Because I told them they wouldn't get any points unless they changed it in some way. And by changing it, they could see that they were making it better. And I actually got some feedback from students that at the beginning, they thought that was going to be really a worthless exercise. They were surprised to find out how much they got out of it. And those are the types of things that collaborative learning can prove to both students and faculty, is how much the work that happens in the collaboration can shape the product that students are producing. Okay, so now let's get into some specific examples. These are some overarching principles and ideas, might have given you some food for thought, but now we can really start to talk about how can students work together collaboratively in your online and hybrid courses. So when faculty are first starting to incorporate collaboration in their classes, especially if they've always been sage on the stage lecturers, the simplest thing that you can do is make yourself stop at a point in your lecture and say, turn to your neighbor and summarize what you just heard, explain an example, show them what you've written in your notes and see if you can compare notes. See if they have anything you don't have and vice versa. How do you want to flesh out your notes? Come up with a question about our discussion, or sketch an outline, sketch a concept map, write a summary table, right? There's a number of things that you can task students with in this quick, I'm going to take a break from lecturing. I'm going to take a drink of my tea. And you guys talk amongst yourselves for a second and then I'll keep going. Then we can advance a little bit more to the think, pair, share, where you still give the students these tasks, but you have them think for a second on their own, and they can make some notes. Then you have them pair up, and then they start to share back to the class as a whole what they've been discussing in their pair. The online version of these, if you're doing a synchronous class, is just a quick random sort into breakout rooms. If you're doing things asynchronously, you can still work this into your lecture videos. You can say, why don't you pause this video and kind of write down some of the thoughts that you're having. And then you can share some of those thoughts on some of our communication tools. So pause in the video and write down the one thing you think is most confusing about what I just talked about. What's one question that you have out of everything that I just did in this lecture? Now go to the Slack and type in what's your question, and you can see other students jumping in either with, I had that same question, that's where I got stuck too, and then you as an instructor can use that as a chance to clarify some of the principles that you're trying to teach. But also a student might jump in and say, here's what I got, and start to give their contribution. And you can start to see a conversation or a discussion unfold asynchronously, very similar to the turn to your neighbor or the think, pair, share that you would put in place formally in your lecture. Poll Everywhere, in one of their blog posts, talked about how to use Poll Everywhere to do think, pair, share. They talked about creating an open-ended activity with some kind of a prompt for students to think about a question and to type in some things, and they would respond with their initial thoughts. And then you can clear the responses and have the students respond again after you've encouraged them to have some of these discussions in a chat, privately with each other. And you can discuss the differences in the responses from after they initially responded to after they had some sort of discussion with someone else in the class and then responded again. This can be done asynchronously with due dates on the responses. For example, you can be like on Monday, okay, there's a prompt up, everybody go in and share your initial thoughts. You've got 48 hours to kind of tell me what you think about this question. Okay, now try to puzzle that out with somebody else in the class, because you're going to get a chance to respond again, either to the same question or maybe a little bit updated or more challenging question, to really encourage them to work with others in trying to craft their response. And then you can discuss the difference in the two sets of responses in a recorded video that you give to them, in some sort of recorded announcement, or some other way that you can give a quick update to the class as a whole. Hey, look how neat this exercise was. Here were the results when everybody first started, but after you guys discussed it with each other, you were able to meet this challenge. Isn't that really neat? So then after Think, Pair, Share, the other thing that we often do to try to get students talking to each other, especially in an online asynchronous class, is to use the discussion board, right? But after a few semesters, the discussion board gets a little stale. If a student has taken several online classes, the discussion board's probably been a part of every one of them. So here are some ways that you can change up the discussion board for students. You can have students come up with the prompts themselves that the entire class will respond to. Okay. You can assign a student a specific week or a specific topic, or you can kind of have some sort of online sign-up sheet where they choose their own. And then students can be, sorry. Oh, I went too far. And then students can present an idea for a discussion topic to the entire class and have the class respond to their discussion prompt. It gives the students a different viewpoint on how those discussions take place. You can come up with the prompt, but make students prepare either a PowerPoint or a PowerPoint with a recorded video as their discussion board response. A lot of times students are like, oh my gosh, writing another discussion board post is the last thing I really want to do right now, but they might have ideas that they could synthesize in a recorded video. You can dial back the number of discussion board prompts. Nobody said everybody has to do a discussion board every week of the entire semester, right? You can do 2 weeks on a discussion board post. The first week can be very traditional. The students post something, but then the second week, you can really get more in depth in your analysis and response to everybody else's post. So you can see how that additional iteration might be able to deepen the discussion. So here's an example where the first week students do a concept map, and the second week they can compare theirs to others. Or they can post a thesis statement for a project that they're working on and then give feedback to other students about that thesis statement of that project. You can provide specific questions for these kinds of discussions. What's similar? What's different? Okay. Or you can put your kind of traditional discussion board expectations up of you have to respond to so many students. Now, another discussion board idea I got from a workshop that I attended with Dr. Christine Harrington. And she calls these Socratic discussions. Okay? In the beginning, she has students respond to the discussion board prompt. She gives them an early deadline, and she does that like just a traditional, here's a discussion board prompt. I want your X number of words posted by Wednesday. And then she has students go through and read them and respond by asking Socratic questions of each other. Clarifying questions, what other explanations might exist, what would someone who disagrees with you say, what's a real world example of this, why is this important? And so she gives students a very long list of potential questions that they could ask. She's helping students understand how this discussion should work by giving them examples of questions that they can use in responding to everybody's original discussion board prompt. And then she gives a last deadline where everybody has to go in and look at the questions that have been posed to them and respond to those Socratic questions. And so she has scaffolded in the steps of reading a discussion board post, asking furthering questions that will actually advance the discussion, and then requiring students to respond to those questions. It gets around the whole myriad of responses that students give that are like, oh, I liked your prompt. That was a good post. I agree with you. Or, oh, I liked your answer. Where did you find out that? Right? Students are on to us, okay? They have their canned discussion board replies. Even if you give them a minimum word count, they take those basic kinds of responses and just expand them with a minimum word count. This is a way to actually teach students the types of questions they could ask back to the original responder to actually further and deepen a conversation about the topic. We can talk a little bit about asynchronous collaboration. Most of our online classes are designed to be asynchronous, and that's where a lot of instructors feel challenged in how to design collaborative learning activities that students can participate in the asynchronous environment. It's very easy for a student taking an online class to feel like they're out there taking this class all alone. And so what are the ways that students can work and can produce products that other students can see and that other students can benefit from, seeing what everyone is producing in response to this particular prompt in the course? One of the best ways to do that is have students do collaborative writing or collaborative editing in a shared document. This is easy to do in Google Docs and Google Slides. But as a Microsoft institution, it's easy for our students to do it in an online Word document or an online PowerPoint. As long as it's shared and you've checked that box that says allow editing, anyone that you share that document with will be able to co-edit that document. So you can have students asynchronously producing work together, editing each other's work, or at least seeing the work that other students are doing. The other thing that you can do with a Word document is if you use See Comments. As students make comments, you can watch a conversation between students develop in the comments over on the right-hand side as they respond to other questions or things that people have highlighted and pointed out. There are some other types of technology products that help students produce content that other students can see. You can set up a Flipgrid with a particular question, and students can provide a video response to the question that you've asked. Other students can watch other students' videos, and so they can see that they're not the only person that's working on this content. They're not the only person responding to this prompt. VoiceThread is very similar. If your institution uses Nomia, you can do conversations on Nomia videos. So any way that a student can be working on the same piece of content and talking to other students that are working on that same content at the same time. Poll Everywhere can be used asynchronously. We think about Poll Everywhere or some of the other questioning, clicker question kinds of tools as things that work in a synchronous live class, but you can leave the poll open for a while and give students a deadline, and then you can report back to the class with a screenshot of the final results. And asynchronous collaboration is not just for online classes. Okay, so you could set up opportunities for your students to work together in between hybrid class sessions. So if your hybrid class is set up so that students are supposed to spend a certain number of hours outside of class working together on something, these are the types of things that they could be contributing to asynchronously, with the deadline being see what you can come up with before the next class session, and then we can debrief about it in person. To talk a little bit more about the co-editing, there is a little bit of work on the instructor side ahead of time to set this up. So you would need to create the framework for the document or the slide presentation or the mind map. If you're using Microsoft Whiteboard and having students collaborate, you have to set up the whiteboard and get the share link. If you're setting up a PowerPoint and you're putting students in groups, group 1, you're going to edit slide 1. Group 2, you're going to edit slide 2. Team 3, you're going to edit slide 3. You'll need to set that up ahead of time and have the share link ready and accessible to students. In a synchronous class session, you share the link to the assignment by pasting it in the chat, or you can post it into Blackboard or your learning management system. Then you can put the students in the breakout rooms and you can have them discuss and co-edit the document while they're working synchronously in those breakout rooms. Asynchronously, you can assign students to a group or a pair and give the link either to their assignment or to the whole class's assignment with the part they're supposed to complete, and ask students to co-edit the assignment before the deadline. And they can choose to have their conversations happen within that document, right? So a student may write a paragraph and be like, feel free to edit this as much as you want. This was just a first draft. And another student can come in and add comments and editing. Or they can take that conversation offline, either back and forth in email or by texting or any course communication tools that you have. They can use those to come up with this co-edited assignment that they're going to turn in together. The online gallery is another way students can interact asynchronously. It incorporates this idea of pre-work. Students would prepare some kind of a product for display. It could be as simple as an idea statement, a thesis statement for a project, a hypothesis in a science class, or it could be as big as a whole project that they have completed. You can display the student work using various tools. Padlet is one. So as an instructor, you could create a Padlet, share the link with students, and they could post a picture of their project or the text of their hypothesis statement, and each student can post their own work that's displayed all on a screen together. Then you can have students review other students' work and provide peer feedback. You can give them a checklist or rubric or a prompt to respond to. And so students would need to go through and view a certain number of other students' work and respond to it with the checklist or the prompt. You can combine this with other types of technology. So for example, as a Microsoft institution, we have access to Microsoft Sway, which is a way that a student can make almost a multimedia presentation using pictures and text and video. Canva has a graph making tool. And Piktochart, I've not used that one personally, but I've had other instructors say it's very easy for students to make a free account and make an infographic with Piktochart. And they could take that infographic, that image with that information in it, and display it in the online gallery so that other students could see it also. In addition to all the asynchronous options we just discussed, sometimes in an online class you do want to hold a synchronous session and you want it to be fun. So this is a fun thing that you can do with students. I call it friendly competition. In an in-person class, have students bring a device. This is sometimes called Bring Your Own Device, or BYOD. Students can partner and share, work in small groups. So if one particular student, their phone is dead that day, they didn't bring their phone that day, they don't have enough memory to download the app that you want to use that day, then students can group up and share their devices. If Pearson is your textbook publisher, check to see if Learning Catalytics comes with your ebook. Or you can use Poll Everywhere, which has a free higher ed option where you can pose questions to students. Kahoot is one that they may have used in secondary school. Maybe they used it in high school, because Kahoot is really designed to pose questions and pit students against one another in this friendly competition, and it'll give students kind of a trophy at the end for first, second, and third place. You can do breakout room trivia, where in an in-person class you might pose a trivia question. Students can work on it just like a pub trivia or a bar trivia kind of thing. In your online class, you can put them into breakout rooms to discuss your question. You give them the question, you put them into breakout rooms, and they can discuss, and then one of them private messages you the answer, and then you can reveal the answer to everybody. And everybody who private messaged you the correct answer gets a point. And at the end, you can tell the total of all the groups and who won. You can set up a quiz in Blackboard and have them go take the quiz and then report the results back to them. So if you want to keep everything in the course shell, but you like this idea of posing questions, then you can set up a quiz in Blackboard, have the students either synchronously or asynchronously go take the quiz, and then report back how everybody did. That's a way to actually kind of do an assessment, but incorporate this spirit of friendly competition in that. So in online synchronous sessions, when we put students in breakout rooms, sometimes it's best if you give them a task to accomplish together. It's sometimes difficult if you just give them a topic. You're going to go discuss X. Go, right? So to aid the students in their collaborative discussion, give them a task to accomplish together. A question to answer, a puzzle to solve, a document to edit, a paragraph to write. Then when you drop into their breakout rooms, you're not just saying, so how's it going? Because the only answer to, so how's it going, is fine, right? What you really want to ask them is, what have you created so far? What have you accomplished so far in your time together? And so you can ask them, have you started editing your document? Have you started typing in the answer to the question? Have you started writing some notes on your discussion? Have you started working on your paragraph? The benefit to this is in Blackboard Collaborate, it's often difficult to communicate with students in their breakout rooms unless you go and drop in on each breakout room individually. And sometimes by dropping in, you're interrupting any discussion that's currently going on. Wouldn't it be nice if you could keep an eye on your groups and see how far they've progressed in their discussion and their work together? If this document is outside of the breakout room, you can watch them fill in the document without having to be privy to their whole conversation by being in the room and being an ominous presence there. So, for example, if you've given them a document to edit, and that's a shared document, either a Google Doc or a OneDrive Word document, you can watch them typing into that, and you can see who's participating. And then, oh, group 1's doing great. Group 3 is doing great. Where's my group 2? Let me go drop in on them. And that's where my facilitation skills are actually needed, rather than interrupting a dynamic conversation that's already going on. So those are some specific ideas of some ways that you can invite students to work together or to see each other's work in asynchronous and synchronous environments. But how do you come up with some of these assignments? Or where can you go to get ideas for more assignments? So here's some sources that we recommend for collaborative work. Publishers really recognize the importance of collaborative learning, and they want to provide you with opportunities and resources to use their materials when you're designing collaborative learning activities for your students. So check with your publisher. This is from a lab book that's published by Pearson, and here on the right is a figure or graphic that's used in this lab book that could really invite some collaboration and discussion among students. Okay, so this is an organ system interaction worksheet. And so in this interaction, you would talk, for example, the way I've used this with a synchronous session is I told students we were going to discuss blood calcium regulation. And so I had this on Blackboard Collaborate, and I typed in blood calcium regulation. And then I asked students to type in the different organ systems that are involved in blood calcium regulation, and to think about the structure-function relationships and anything else that they know about how that system contributes to this interaction. Okay. Also in the lab manual, the instructions with this exercise say work together with your group, write down the muscle and its actions. That's very fact-based information that you can find in the textbook or in the tables in the lab manual. But then discuss how this connects to things that you're all learning about muscles. And so here students can start to both connect with each other and connect material to prior learning. Okay. And so I really like that this particular lab manual is designed to help facilitate that kind of person-to-person collaboration in the lab class environment. I would be remiss if I gave a presentation on collaborative learning and didn't talk about POGIL. The Bio 137 Title III committee did a lot of professional development related to POGIL, but POGIL is a source of a lot of these collaborative learning activities. POGIL stands for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning, And it starts with a written model that students explore, and then students invent a concept that they think explains this model. And they test that concept against other iterations of the written model to guide their own inquiry-based learning. And they develop a number of these process skills at the same time. They develop oral and written communication skills, teamwork and problem solving skills, critical thinking skills. So here's an example of one where they give students this model and they ask various questions about it. And ideally, the student will understand that a lot of our medical terms are broken into prefixes and roots and suffix. And then to make a term, what you do is you put together some of these roots to make the term that you're looking for. And then they can, once they've come up with that concept to explain this model, it helps them to understand, okay, if you come up with a word and you don't understand what the word means, you can break that word down into its component roots to try to figure out what new vocabulary means as we learn about each system by system. Okay, so there are books of these POGIL activities that you can purchase that have these types of activities where it's very easy to assign students to groups and have them work together on these POGIL activities. Problem-based learning or project-based learning is another technique. It's also very popular in the sciences, but here's a website that has some fee-based but also some free projects that you can look up, and they have a number of topics other than just sciences. So here's how I've implemented problem-based learning in my anatomy classes. Students get a one-page story that talks about a person who's been exercising on a warm day and feels hot, and maybe they collapse. Students are asked to write down what questions they have after they read that one page to begin the story. Students research and learn the answers to their questions and share the answers that they've researched with their group. And they discuss those answers and receive more information about the case, right? So this is a very iterative process where students are working very collaboratively and iteratively to solve this problem or this puzzle. Finally, students, after they've gone through all of these steps of asking questions and finding answers, they can come up with the answer. In this case, I asked them to draw a diagram of how thermoregulation occurs in the body, right? And so this is all very inquiry-based, very collaboratively driven activities where students use information to form a model of a concept. Both POGIL and PBL lend themselves to a more synchronous environment, but they can also be implemented asynchronously. You can use a discussion board, you can use a communication tool like Slack, or you can use some of the co-editing that we've talked about. So you can give them that one pager in a shared document and ask students to go in and do comments and respond to other student comments so they can start documenting where their questions arise in their reading and what other questions the people in their group have. One of my colleagues that implements problem-based learning also uses Slack as a communication tool, and she tells students when they're working on a case, her email is closed, and she directs all student communication about the case to the Slack. That way, as students discuss back and forth among their groups and among other colleagues, all students can see their questions and their answers and can benefit from the shared information. And then she chimes in to make sure that the answers that students are giving are accurate and correct information, and also she can add to it to give the full picture. And she sometimes gives students hints that way, like you're almost there, but what if I give you this other little piece of information? Right? And so all the students can benefit from that conversation asynchronously in that chat the way they would if you were working in groups in an in-person classroom. So our last topic to consider is technology and collaboration. How can we use tools that help the collaborative process? What's really interesting is that people now use technology even when they're trying to relax, right? So we use Netflix when we're trying to relax. We surf Facebook or Twitter when we're trying to relax. So what do you reach for when you want to be entertained? What do you reach for when you want to be calmed? What do you reach for when you want to reach out and communicate to other people? And what technologies can you then incorporate into your online class that you're already familiar with using? Now, it's going to be really easy to go nuts with all of the types of technology that are available, especially the ones that have been further developed during the pandemic. So I recommend that you pick maybe one or two tools that you want to learn and incorporate in your class. You don't want to increase your cognitive load or your students' cognitive load with lots of new apps and bells and whistles to learn. One new thing to learn about and implement, I think, is reasonable. You don't want to pick everything that's on this list. But here's a summary of everything that we've talked about in this presentation that you could use. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are ones that we've mentioned as we've gone through. And these are ways that you can encourage students to either communicate with each other, work in conversation and collaboration with each other, or at least see the work that other students are doing and use that to build on their own. So we talked about co-editing documents. One type of activity that you may want to implement with students is to assign a reading assignment that they need to comment on. Perusal and hypothesis will both allow you to assign PDFs or websites or videos that students can annotate with their comments, and those comments can be in conversation with one another. We talked about Poll Everywhere and Kahoot and learning Catalytics for the friendly competition. VoiceThread and Flipgrid and Padlet are all ways that students can see other work that other students have done. You can use course communication tools as asynchronous chats. I mentioned Slack. Discord is very similar. A number of faculty are using Discord servers with individual channels for different courses. GroupMe is one that I've used with a summer research program with undergraduate students that was a real quick way for everybody to ask questions or talk to each other in a very kind of stripped down, streamlined phone app. And then, of course, there's ways that we can meet face to face, and students have a broad array of these that we can choose from. At our institution, we can use Blackboard Collaborate. We can use Microsoft Teams. If you want to use something that students might be more familiar with outside of class, you could choose Zoom or Google Meet. I, at one point in the pandemic, had a list of all of the different video conferencing software that I had used. I had used Cisco WebEx. I had used Collaborate. I had used Teams. I had used Zoom. I had used BlueJeans. I had used Gather, I had used Gather Town, I had used Google Meet, and I had used Google Duo. So I almost have more types of video conferencing software that I've used than I have fingers, right? So there's lots and lots of different options. And allowing students to kind of choose what they're comfortable with is a way that they can then start to connect face-to-face even outside of your synchronous sessions with other students in the course. Okay, so this has been just kind of an overview of ways that you can incorporate collaborative learning activities into online and hybrid sessions and just start to get students in conversation with one another about their learning, working collaboratively to produce a new product for your course, or to at least be able to see the work that other students are doing and know that they are not taking your class all alone. They're not all out there singly, one by one, trying to learn and process the content, that they can start to see that other students are in this learning experience with them, that students are working toward the same goals that they are, and that they're not in this all alone, because we're all in this together. You can feel free to reach out to me or Carolyn with any questions that you have by email. And thank you so much for listening to our workshop.